Hello, and welcome to another segment of Ask a Genetic Counselor. We're here with Daniella, an amazing genetic counselor with Gene Test Now, and she's going to answer some of our burning questions. So thank you for being here again, Daniella.
Of course, my pleasure.
First of all, today's question is, what is direct-to-consumer genetic testing? Can you explain that? And there's so many companies out there who are offering this, right? You can get an influx of Facebook ads or just you see it everywhere, even on Super Bowl commercials. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into what direct-to-consumer testing is and kind of the differences between some of these companies.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's one that's really relevant to today. So direct-to-consumer genetic testing would be, I guess, strictly in the definition, differentiating between some of the other genetic testing labs that we typically order from would be a lab that allows a consumer, so basically anybody, to order that test themselves. So you don't need a doctor's orders, you don't need a healthcare provider's orders, you don't need any level of approval or there's no sort of screening process or management process by a healthcare provider in you obtaining that test. So if you think about it, it would be like you decide that you want to have a blood test for a CBC, which is just like a basic blood panel, and you would be able to walk into any lab and say, I order myself this CBC, or I order myself this MRI, something like that. So there are a lot of companies that do that for a lot of different reasons when it comes to genetics, whether it be ancestry or sometimes ancestry plus some other health information. The point being that with those options, you do not need to go through a healthcare provider to obtain that testing.
Right.
I think that's kind of the main difference, but then as you go through the process, there's some other differences that can occur between a test that's a direct-to-consumer test versus a carrier screening test like JScreen, which a consumer can initiate on their own. However, they're not actually ordering it for themselves. And then, for example, other types of genetic testing that maybe you actually go and see a genetic counselor to have ordered for you. So the technology between these two types of testing, a provider-initiated test versus a direct-to-consumer test, the science, the technology, the actual quality of the testing is different. So it picks up different things, it looks at different things. If you're going to compare them sort of side by side, the provider-initiated tests, things like JScreen, things that you would get through a healthcare provider are always going to be of a higher quality, a higher precision, a higher analysis across the board than a direct-to-consumer test. And it's really important to know that because I think there's a lot of false reassurance that comes from these direct-to-consumer tests where people will have them done and be like, oh, I did genetic testing and it was normal. Everything came back fine, so I'm kind of good to go. But that analysis is not considered good enough for us to say you're good to go and fine. We would want to do something much more comprehensive at a much more higher level to be sure.
And to that point, I think it's so important, right? Like if you're getting information, whether you like cilantro or not, versus if you're a BRCA, BRCA carrier and have a predisposition for certain cancers, it's very different information. And you certainly want medical personnel involved along the way and also for the results. So maybe you can touch on receiving the results, whether it's via email or through a genetic or your physician and kind of, what that means for the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so again, because these provider-initiated tests are actually under the supervision, the orders under the supervision of a healthcare provider, and the results also come under the supervision of a healthcare provider, that means somebody that has either, let's just use JScreen as an example. If they have a JScreen carrier panel, when they get their results back, they have a genetic counselor that is kind of assigned to them that they will go over the results with them and discuss it with them, and whatever those results may be, whether they be positive, negative, there's maybe some indeterminate information on there. A genetic counselor will explain it all to them, talk to them about recommendations and next steps. With these direct-to-consumer tests, there's really no point of contact with any sort of healthcare provider or specialist. So what that tells what that says to me is, these results are kind of either probably emailed at this point, or through some secure web page
Mhm.
provided to individuals, and that person is really responsible for understanding those results, whatever they may be. So, somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of genetics knowledge or does, it's kind of up to them to figure out, what does this mean? How good was this test? Is this enough? Um, answer all of those questions. What do I do next? Does this mean anything? And I think on the most, there's things like, does cilantro taste like soap? That's kind of a pretty benign, harmless, kind
Right.
of fun fact. I think you don't need too much, there's not too much weight that gets put on there. And to be honest, you probably already know if cilantro
Yeah,
tastes like soap,
exactly.
right? So it's kind of not a news flash, but some of these direct to consumer companies will report out things like BRCA mutations, BRCA mutations, which are really, really, really impactful results. And I've had situations where people come to me after doing a direct to consumer test over a year ago,
Wow.
were actually BRCA positive and just never really scrolled down to that part of the
Mhm.
report. And their daughter saw it kind of a year later and was like, hello, what is this?
Wow.
And then it incites this sort of panic, and it's like a scramble to figure out, wait, what does this mean? I didn't even know, it's been sitting here. And it's a really unfortunate process when it becomes kind of a crisis like that. So I think I always tell people, science project for a rainy day, it's fun, get, your ancestry, cilantro things, other kind of these benign, harmless facts. Like, it's fun and it's fine and, harmless. But when we start entering the space of things that are going to have medical implications, that's where
Exactly.
it starts to become a little trickier.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for enlightening us. This was really helpful, and I think will clarify a number of questions for people because they're not sure. Like, do I walk into a Target or a CVS and grab a test off the shelf, or how am I ordering it? Who's involved? And what is the role of a genetic counselor like yourself in this process? So, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to our next segment.
Thanks.